DEI for Real. And Nancy and I are your co-hosts. Um, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Spectra later in the program because we're going to talk about the data as it relates to wages. So I'll skip my part for now. But Nancy, introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, so I'm Nancy Schick of Third Ear Conflict Resolution. I am a New York employment attorney and global workplace mediator. I'm also working on my second book and dealing with as you probably heard when I came in, just juggling life, right? So it's what happens to all of us. So if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, that's why we do this, is to help you get a little reassurance, education, activation, and leadership. So happy to be here, and let's see what we can do to move forward through this crazy new landscape that we've been dealing with for the past couple of years.
Okay, so as part of your reassurance, no, you are not imagining it. Our current climate and the legislative whiplash between DEI bans in some stage and the in some states and the purge of government workers via DOGE, it's all kind of creating a hodgepodge of compliance, shall we say, with executive orders. So let's start with, I usually start with Project 2025 Tracker. There's 320 objectives, 34 agencies. It's 53% complete, and there are 1,012 days until the end of this presidential term. Now, how it relates to wages, the Heritage Foundation study found that federal employees received wages that were 22% higher than similar private sector workers. So, and then if you consider their benefits, then it was 30 to 40% higher. And I believe that was the impetus towards, getting rid of, hundreds of thousands of government workers. There's also the H-1B program. They wanted it to be transformed into an elite program, so which employers could only bring in the top tier foreign workers at the highest wages, so as not to depress American opportunities. Also, the Davis-Bacon Act 23 required federally financed construction projects to pay prevailing wages, and they want to repeal that so that the market could determine the wages. They also want to phase out the H-2B visa program, which is the one that lets in temporary workers in farming in particular, and they want to cap that at the current levels. So without this program, many farmers would have to drastically increase wages in order to lure, Americans in to do that work. The second,
Okay, and Terry says yes, thank you.
okay, good,
We're
good.
good.
Somebody else wanted to record it, and I think that's kind of record this meeting, and I think that's kind of where it got a little bit screwed up. Workforce changes impacting wages. There was a study done by Littler, and they reported, and this is 2026, 35% of companies have workforce reductions, 30% have paused or reduced hiring, 18% reduced or eliminated perks, 17% delayed promotions and raises, 13% skipped bonuses. So, yay us. And this number, that number right there, 257.5, that's the average number of people that applied for a single job opening. So if you've been applying for things and you're not even getting callbacks, um, you got 257 people on average that want your job. And then this is the study. We've all heard about the wage gap for women. The Institute for Women's Policy Research said that this is the second year that the gender gap in earnings worsened. And here's what it is currently: 92.9 cents for Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders. That's a lot of letters. 80.9 cents for all women. This is the figure you usually see. 66.5 cents for Black women. 58 cents for Latino women. 57.9 cents for Indigenous women. And 56 cents for women with a disability. So what that means is that the typical white woman working full-time year-round will reach parity at the current rate in 2076. And I will be long dead, as will a lot of people that are alive today. So,
And you look at all the other categories of women, and they're
yep,
going to be even further behind.
yep, agreed.
Unless we do something, which is
Unless we
why we're
do
here,
something.
unless we do something
Yay!
about it.
Okay, Nancy. Go ahead. Legal update. And here we
So, legal update. So, in 2023, there were some pay transparency acts that passed. I believe some of it, they come in different forms, but New York's was in 2023. And what we are seeing is this is good news, I think, that businesses are required in New York with if they have four or more employees to provide job descriptions and list the compensation ranges for those designated job opportunities, and that includes promotions and transfers. We've seen other states fall in line with this as well. We've got California, Colorado, Washington, New Jersey, Illinois, and Massachusetts, and I believe Delaware has one that's taking effect next year. So a lot of states are jumping onto this trend. And although the law is not the only way to get this done, it is somewhat reassuring that we're seeing that. And I've seen a lot more opportunity for some of my friends and colleagues. And look, I sometimes not just for my clients, but I like to see for research purposes what those ranges are doing and how is that affecting. And what we haven't seen is the gloom and doom that everybody thinks, right? Like that, oh, suddenly employers are going to have to ask for more. And I know, Chris, you'll talk about this later about how different people ask for different salaries, but we're not seeing that it's changed much. And if anything, what's happening is it's maybe leveling the playing field internally, which is why I continue to talk about this. So we have the pay transparency that is there. Then the other thing I want to reassure everyone is that while the labels of DEI are still being debated, and IBM just settled a False Claims Act case, I believe on Friday, the fundamentals of pay equity remain a legal and operational necessity. In other words, yes, in these states we just talked about, you're going to have to do it, but we're seeing more states jump on board because, look, and entities, large entities are operating in multiple states anyway. And so you don't want to have pay transparency in New York and then, oh, secrecy in Tennessee, right? So we're seeing this kind of level and we're actually seeing a positive impact on that. So if you do have a wage gap, it doesn't mean it's a sin or anything like that. You're not in big trouble necessarily, but it's definitely something to look at. From a recruiting angle, we're definitely seeing that that improves your perception as an employer, makes you a more desirable employer, and look, you don't have to hide from your employees if you're transparent about these things. So you don't have to track as much. I think about people who lie, for example, and you have to be really smart to keep track of who you told what to. So transparency like relieves you of some additional obligations. So think about it that way. Not that anybody here is a liar. I just, by analogy, you can see that there's a lot that you have to track if you're having pay disparity. Whereas if you just have a job and you have a pay range and you can quantify that, it just makes your job easier. And again, it makes you more desirable as an employer.
And one of the things that I've seen in some of the organizations that I've worked with is that they're getting away from a pay range and just saying, this is the pay. You know, this is what it is. Here's the starting wage for this job. And then as you progress in the job, you go up and up and up.
Yeah,
Um,
and a lot of unions, right? That's the way they base their
yeah,
pay.
yeah.
And that's the way the contracts are. And something that we'll probably talk about again is that the having a bonus structure that's tied to performance as a whole is also a really great idea of that way you're seeing that the organization, the organizational goal, thinking of employment as a partnership, you see your role in reaching that goal and then you get rewarded for it. It again creates a better work environment for everyone and it increases the partnership and the engagement and the responsibility where everybody is truly working as a team, not just in label, but truly functioning toward a mutually beneficial goal.
Okay. So education, educate. So we're going to take a little closer look. And what I want to say, first of all, is that what Spectra measures is inclusion in our data. So we show inclusion so we can see very easily in the data who is not feeling included. So who is being left behind? Number one, people with disabilities. They almost always score lower on our perceptions of management. And here's a quote from one of our participants. Quote, our organization's DEI efforts need to integrate A for accessibility. Without accessibility, promoting full participation and equitable experiences amid diversity via specific strategies such as captioning, sign language interpretation, audio description, accessible or alternate formats, media, websites, online, virtual events, and exhibits, blah, blah, blah. Without that, DEI is not fully possible. And just FYI, the website, Spectra's website, we actually, it was a big process. It, cost a few pennies, but we made our website A for accessible to people that are vision impaired. And so, and
And if
who
you're
else?
not doing that at this point, you're probably in violation. And I can tell you there are plenty of attorneys in my world who do nothing but go and look for the websites that are not accessible.
Well, there you go. Who else is being left behind? Well, we saw the wages for women, and they're being left behind for wages. They're also in our survey, they also rate management lower than men do, and I've got some data showing that in a minute. And socioeconomic status also impacts women more than men. And here's a quote from a participant. Quote, I will observe that just focusing on skin color is not the answer to DEI and is in fact racist. It's about time that socioeconomic status became more centralized, and I do not see this happening. Um, so, yeah. Um, this insensitivity to socioeconomics, age, disability, and even cultural restraints. Well, wake up leadership. You are part of an elitist group who can attend in-person events and pay for airfares and expensive hotels and fees. So, wages, direct connection to women in that case, but also people with disabilities and other issues. Who else is being left behind? Black people. In Spectra's assessments, Black people nearly always rate their perception of management lower compared to white people and Asian Americans. Here's here's one comment. I don't care. They say DEI, they say the right things. DEI policies are often inherently racist and make white people, Asians, and lighter skinned brown and Black people less than others. When I hear this crap now, I roll my eyes and go on with my day. So, Nancy, and you had a word of caution here.
Yeah, I had a word of caution here. Like, look, people have responses. Your brain does a certain thing, especially when you feel threatened. So it's fine if you have those thoughts. It's what we want you to also do is slow yourself down because your thoughts and your feelings are not always reliable tests for reality. That's why Spectra does an assessment and we do objective data gathering so that you can make a true assessment of what your circumstances are in your organization and what you are feeling as an individual. It doesn't mean, again, we don't invalidate anyone's experience, but just like your biases, you want to just slow your roll a little bit, check yourself, and not just say, oh, people who are in this category automatically fall into a lesser or viewed that like really back that up with data, not just an occasional thing. Um, it's not always the way it seems, is really what it comes down to. And I can say that as someone who's done a lot of different cases. As you probably know, if you've been on any of our prior webinars, I've done courses about there is no hierarchy of protected classes. So you can't just look at someone, right? We don't talk about people as monoliths and groups of people as monoliths. So we want to make sure that we're taking that closer look, backing it up with the subjective viewpoint, but also the objective data. And then we bring them together to tell the story the best way we can. But ultimately, it's what is it within your control? That's what we're asking. We're not expecting anyone to go out and fix the whole world. If we could, that would have already been done. But what you can do is take a closer look with your own circumstances and be mindful that the moment you go, people this, black people, white people, women, men, however you categorize people, if you put everybody in one group and assume they all fall that way, you are automatically walking down the road where you're gonna make a mistake. Hopefully it won't be a legal one.
Well, and that brings me to this slide, which is, although we focus on inclusion, we do have two statements that could be construed as focusing on pay because these are wage adjacent, which is not specifically wages, but is career progression. And here you see, and these are the single buckets, but I want to point out that people are there's intersectionality here. A lot of people are more than one race. And how do you and we did a intersectionality in a one of our annual reports a couple years ago. And when you look at, for example, a Black transgender woman, they're like way down on the list. And white, heterosexual men, they're right up there at the top. So anyway, I want to point out that, this is intersectionality plays a role. But, look at the orange one is non-binary people, and they are lower in the first question. They are quite a bit lower in the second question, and they're not questions, they're statements. Um, and also none of these scores are great. Here is the average. This is if it was a bell curve, this is, 3.5 is smack dab in the middle. So all of these people, if I were grading in college or high school, these would all be C students. None of these is wonderful. So there's definitely room for improvement.
Yeah, and I think it brings up also the challenge of look, the majority of us are going to be in the middle of almost anything, right? Like that's how statistics work. But what we look at is, are you giving opportunities to people in the broad spectrum, right? It's that's what we're trying to do is make sure that if you do have opportunities, then you're opening them to people of color, people with disabilities, making sure that you're recruiting in places that maybe you haven't always. Don't just go with, is this my buddy? Did I go to the same school with them? Right? Really looking at the, again, objective data and also looking at the subjective and bringing them together. Because what we've long seen is things like culture fit and elite university, which perpetuate the systems that cause the inequities. And that's what we're here to challenge is we're not blowing everything up. We're not taking political sides. What we're looking at is getting you to look in your own organization and say, with a lot more confidence that you have taken the actions necessary to create opportunities for people.
So the invisible social inflation, what the heck is that?
So basically, what we're seeing, and I don't think this will surprise anyone, is that one of the reasons I keep people out of court, especially with their workplace disputes, is that look, a lawsuit's always been a gamble. You spend a lot of time, money, and energy on a lawsuit, and you still often will walk away dissatisfied, whether you win or lose. What we're seeing when it comes to employers is that the anti-corporate sentiment among jurors is likely to do this, what we call social inflation judgment. So, in other words, if you're a large corporate entity or perceived to be in the same category as a large corporate entity, juries are assuming you have the money to pay and that you probably did something wrong.
Mm.
So that's what we're calling this social inflation. So what's happening is just like we're seeing in social media with protests, with all kinds of things, that people are just assuming that if you're a business, you're somehow greedy. So you don't want to be in the courtroom where you're at the mercy of people who may or may not be paying attention. And I'm not saying all jurors do this, but it's a lot harder for people who are struggling to go in and see somebody who's making billions of dollars who aren't business people, right? They don't necessarily understand how budgets are done. That, yes, you might have made $1 billion, but you paid out this much. They're not doing that calculation. They're just seeing employer, complaint, let's give somebody money because they're trying to do kind of the Robin Hood balance the scales a little bit. So you don't want to end up in court if you can avoid it.
No.
And that's somebody who's spent most of her life in court, right? Or well, I should say my professional life. And so I talk a lot about, you've probably heard me say it already, the partnership model of employment. That's where we're moving. We're moving into this idea that employers and employees are in partnership toward the attainment of mutually beneficial goals. And the more you can think about employment in that way, the more you can find solutions to whatever's going on in your organization, the more you can solve these problems outside of court, which is, again, where I encourage you to be, unless you have unlimited time, money, and resources that you want to throw at a lawsuit for the principal.
Well, and some people do that, but yeah, I
It's your option, free country.
yeah, I wouldn't personally do it. So activate, and let's take a look at some data. And data is our friend. It helps us move from we've got a problem to we have a process. So I'm going to show you a couple things here. First of all, beyond the Spectra assessment. So when the assessment is done, we show who is feeling included, what an individual's beliefs are related to inclusion, and their interpersonal skills. After that's been identified, it's up to the organization to do something with the data. So we give them suggestions, but we never know, Spectra doesn't know, which ones were implemented, who's responsible for it, what the timeline is, what the plan is, did they do it? So beyond the assessment, I want to introduce you to the International Standard Organization's 30-415, 3415. And this is relatively new. It was in 2021 that it was released. And what it does is it puts a price on the lack of inclusivity. And it changes it from it's beyond, the training, bias training and all the little checkbox things. It's beyond that because it deals with the system, not the individual. So these are the different buckets. So there's an audit, and then there's a policy framework, the systems are addressed, and then there's responsibilities are assigned, and everybody has a job. It's not just sitting under human resources. So it's consistent with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that the United Nations adopted in 1948. It's in alignment with the International Labor Organization's Declaration of Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work that was adopted in 1998 and amended in 2022. And it's in alignment with the EEOC. So it's in alignment with all of these. And this is kind of in a nutshell, this is how it works. So, and my advice has always been that if your chief diversity officer reports to the head of HR, you're not including several roles within your organization who also have DEI responsibility. So there's roles and responsibilities are looked at in the audit, and then the outcomes, which would be the business case, the actions, and this is the to-do list, and the measures, and this is the accountability feature. And Nance, you had a comment here about who in an organization has DEI responsibility.
Yeah, my feeling is that, look, DEI is everybody's responsibility. And I think that's one of the ways that we've kind of gotten off track is that we made it more of the performative, right, instead of the transformative. So when you make it an initiative, it makes it more of a project that's only for certain people. And when you make it a standard, right, like a filter for everything you do, it becomes part of your culture. That's the distinction that I like to make, is that it's really more about all of us always checking ourselves. Like I said, slowing down, checking the data, looking at the things within our control, because we all have a role in this.
And this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
So it's very, there's 171 risk elements, and this is all based on risk. So there's risk groups, risk categories, risk domains, and it's very complex. I'm going through the training to be certified in it right now, and it's a lot. I mean, I feel like I've gone back to college to get certified on this. But, take a look at this if you're looking at, and it's kind of, small to read, but numbers 9 through 26 are all in the HR department. And HR does have a big role, but there's other people, other jobs, other things that are part of it, part of the systems, in addition to the products and services that you deliver and your supply chain. It's all connected.
And
So,
I'll just throw in that this may look overwhelming when you're breaking it into the granular level, but with like so many of the things that we do, some of this is intuitive. But the reason we break it into these, I'm not at all involved in this project, but the reason a lot of these things are broken into the granular level is because we do see, just like your body, right? The more you get in and you understand how your cells work or how hydration works in your individual body, it's the same kind of concept. Is there are these small tweaks that you can make that have great impact. So breaking it down might seem like, oh my God, 171, how will I do it all? We're not asking you to do it today, right? But you can take small actions on a regular basis to keep improving. And as you do that, you will see the outcome.
so one of the things that happens is, you go through the 171 things and pick five that you're going to work on. And then there's a peer review. So if I were to do an organization, somebody else who's certified is going to review my work. So it's very complex. It can fit organizations from 30 up to 300,000. And it is explained, and I'm going to put something in the chat, and I'm copying it right now so that I can do that. Copy, and then chat, and then paste, paste,
And
go.
then Barbara has asked you where you're getting your ISO 30415 certification.
I'm connected with a group of Canadians. It's an organization, and I can't put the link in right now, but I'll put it in the notes as a follow-up. Um, and it's a couple of women, two women who are from Central America, and but the group is mostly Canadian, with one gentleman who is in Switzerland. I'm the only white lady in there. It's all um, and it's mostly women. There's the gentleman who's in Switzerland is one of the only men, but it's a very detailed course, and it's hard. There's a test where we'll be analyzing different organizations, and we're going to place them at where they are in a maturity level from zero, because you can be a zero. If you're just ad hoc doing things, you're a zero. Zero to one, two, three, zero to three. And I will see if I can do that while Nancy's talking. I'll see if I can find the link and put it in there. Um, so Nancy,
All
and here
right.
we
So,
are.
wait, have to catch up. So one of, when we're talking about standards too, I have now kind of formed my practice around what I call the hack standard. I like to hack workplace disputes, meaning I focus on, are they humane? Any result that we're working on, is it humane? Is it affordable? Is it quick? That's what most businesses are looking for, because we don't necessarily want to just go with affordable and cause harm. It's just a lot of times that's what gets measured. And as we know, what gets measured is what matters. So what we look at now is this a humane way of approaching? That's where HAQ comes from. Then what we do beyond that is, once we kind of filter through that, when we're talking about pay gap, you're looking at who is in this underpaid group and doing it before they come to you. I think that's something that has long happened. Is we, as employers, we we try to get somebody to take the lowest possible salary, and that seemed like a good idea, right? When you're looking at the bottom line, when you're talking to your shareholders, when you're talking to your board, right? That seems like a great idea until your people start leaving because somebody else is going to pay them more. So I'm of the mindset of, let's identify this now. Let's start going to them before they come to you. And I really doubt that most employees, if you went to them and said, we're going to bump your pay, are going to go, oh, no, don't. Right. So I wouldn't worry about that aspect. But I know people are a little concerned about, oh, well, if I go to them and I raise their pay, then they're going to think that I was cheating them in some way. And it's like, don't always assume the worst. A lot of people understand that maybe you had valued a position in one way because of how it was at the time that it was posted, and then it transformed. But that's the other part of it, is if you add responsibilities, do an assessment to make sure you're still being fair. You, as a business owner and an employer or HR person, you should have an idea of what the range is for a position anyway. And then you look at that of affordability, use your data and have a plan if you have gaps, and being able to defend them to your shareholders or whoever you're responsible to. Because again, you'll lose key employees. Talk to them about that. Talk to them about the price of replacing. And I believe that we've heard anything from 50 to 200% of a key employee's salary is what it takes to replace them. Then the cost of hiring somebody, right? Training that person and defending lawsuits, even if you win. So it's just a lot better for you to address these up front. And some of the ways you can be quick about it, HAQ, right, is you can look at that low hanging fruit. Again, go through your job descriptions and anywhere that the duties have changed, look at, well, what would that cost? What if we had hired another person? But also for those of you who are employees hearing this and thinking, ooh, I'm going to go ask for a raise, that's again great to if you think you're being underpaid, but one of the ways to have that conversation is also to quantify it, right? Look at what are you bringing to the employer that helps them make money, right? Because look, if your employer's not making money, you could ask for any salary in the world, but if they if they go out of business, you don't have a job, which means you have no salary. That's why we talk about this in partnership. Anything is a negotiation. And you have to find that leverage on both sides to come together.
And I
Chris, what
want
were
to,
you going to say?
well, I was just going to say that, and I used to use this term, but low-hanging fruit is often referred to those Black people who were hung from trees during Jim Crow and before. So I have struck that from my word usage and just replaced it with easy wins, quick wins, something
Okay.
like that. And I didn't have time to talk to Nancy about that beforehand.
Yeah,
So
and I apologize for that because for someone who grew up with a farmer family, we just picked the
the
fruit
low-hanging
we could
fruit.
get to. So that's what that meant for me. And but I think that's a great example also of recognizing that words have different meaning to different people and just being mindful of it. So I apologize if I've offended anyone, and I now, with this new knowledge, will not use that phrase. So thank you.
And did you want to talk about this one?
So yeah, so I have in my first book what I call smile actions, and they're a variation of SMART goals, right? And it's where you're looking for things that are specific, measurable. And it's funny, I'm going, wow, I put me on the spot because I did take it out of the presentation originally.
Oh, sorry.
So,
And
oh, individualized, right? So it's something
okay.
you can do that you like to do, right? That's going to help you move forward. And it's easy for you to fit into your schedule. So that's why I call them SMILE, because I know the SMART goals have been challenged also. And some of it's because we want to do the best. High achievers reach too far. And then when you don't do anything, what do you do? Beat yourself up. So I want you to just think about what is something small that you could do in your organization today. It's Monday, so you could do it by the end of the week that might move your pay equity forward. And that just depends on what your role is, right? We know we're talking to a diverse group of people out there with different levels of responsibility and different levels of authority. So with that in mind, it might be that you do your own research on your own job and go to and start preparing to have a conversation with your employer. Or if you're in the position where you're making the decisions on what salaries are, maybe it's doing the Spectra assessment and then going from there, right? But it's let's move this conversation forward. So it stands for specific, measurable, individualized, meaning it's for you, right? Something you choose. Likable, because if you don't like it, you're not going to do it. And then E, it's easy for you to fit into your schedule because if it's too big of a goal, you're not going to do it. And then you're going to beat yourself up usually for not getting it done. And we don't want you doing that. We want you moving forward.
And Nancy, why don't you talk about leading through the fractures? I love that term.
Yeah, so that's a big topic in my upcoming book is it's kind of the overarching theme is and thank you, Chris, because our our webinar series that we began last year kind of led to this is that it's this feeling of everything's falling apart. And I'm not saying it is, but there are a lot of fractures. There are a lot of places that we're seeing that light is being shown in different sections of where we need to tighten up. And I've often described it as kicking the can down the road. And well, here we are at the end of the road and we got a bunch of cans stacked up. So that's where we are, is if you're feeling that, you're not alone. And you're not imagining it, as Chris said earlier. But there is still a lot that we can do. And when it comes to things like pay equity, the work that we're doing is really about taking action regardless of what's going on with DEI bans, any of the executive orders. It's basically you can't give up. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. That's why we're going to keep doing this, is because we're the ones that care enough to jump in there and try to make a change. And so I want to just take a pause real quickly and see what Sam has to say here. Um,
And while you're doing that, one of the tactics that I think we alluded to, but I didn't mention in particular, is, oh, I did mention it. Don't give a range for job pay, because women, if there's a range, women tend to pick something in the middle, or they pick the bottom, I just want to get in. And men tend to pick the top, regardless of, and these go regardless of qualifications. Men pick the top, women pick the middle or the bottom, and then what happens is over time, when you get those incremental raises, the gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger because it started out as a gap. So, and that's my pitch for, just having it be, we're going to pay you, $65,000 for this job, period. And that's where you start. And if you don't want that pay,
I
just
think that's a great idea. And
pause.
I think it works in some, in some situations.
Yep.
I'm not totally against the range, and I'll just say that because I do understand that different people do come in with different experience, specifically in the job that they are applying for.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, the other reason I want to jump in is because women of color, any of you that have heard, maybe it's even a man who takes who you're not the normal man who asks for the top salary. That's okay too. Be prepared to negotiate, because this is going to be an ongoing issue in your career. Is you need to always know what your leverage is so you can have those conversations and ask for what you deserve. I want you doing that. I have a coaching background, so I'm gonna admit that I'm always gonna call you into being the biggest version of yourself, which means get uncomfortable, because I want you out there doing your best and getting your best in return. So that's regardless of where you fall. If you're an employee, you're a manager, this is who I want you to be, because if we're not out there asking for it, we're not going to get it. And we all know that, right? If you don't ask, the answer is no.
Well, and it depends on what the job market's doing. I have one of my I'm in two book clubs because one book club just isn't enough. And one of my book clubs, one of the women in there was in charge of hiring. She worked in the schools, and she was tasked with hiring paraprofessionals.
Mhm.
And these are the people that go to classes with special needs kids and things like that. She said that she had so many people, and maybe this is the 257.5, she had people applying for that job who had their PhDs.
Mhm.
And that's where the job market was at the time. So, it's
And
all,
that's going to be an ongoing issue.
yeah.
So, and it's actually right on point with what Sam's talking about. So, Sam mentions if there isn't a range, I assume I can't negotiate. If there's one listed, I assume it's up for negotiation. So I love that and I agree. If there's a
Oh,
range, negotiate. Look, even if you're given a one number, don't be afraid to say, here's what my number is. Is there any room? And as somebody who represented hockey players with salary caps many years ago, I learned how to negotiate around whatever the stated pay was. So don't be afraid to also say, okay, you don't have the cash, so maybe you can't give it to me in salary, but let's talk about other types of compensation. Could you pay for me to go to certain conferences? Could you pay for my membership in certain trade organizations? Things like that. Could you pay for me to get a coach? That kind of thing. Like, think about the other things you would spend your money on. And don't be afraid to ask your employer or potential employer for something that has value to you. Sometimes it's, could I get 3 more days of paid vacation? Something like that. Could I get flexibility on Fridays? Whatever it is for you. So obviously you have to do that mindfully and you have to know that you have the leverage for that, which means you need to know your market value. That's the other thing that I'm trying to get across to you. So that's where we want to go with pay equity. I want you to hear it from both sides, right? That it's an issue, but it's not only the issue from the employer or from the employee. If you think about these as partnerships, you all can come together. And quite frankly, if you have an employer that's not willing to talk to you about your value and find ways to keep you, you might want to look for another job.
yeah. Well, but don't quit your first job before you have the second one lined up because
Yeah.
it's not a good time to be
Yeah,
looking for a
that's true. It's
job.
not a great time to be out there looking, which some employers unfortunately will take advantage of that.
And you had ethical sovereignty. What do you mean by that, Nancy?
So the other thing that's coming up a lot is I'm, putting those last touches on the revision to the manuscript is this concept of ethical sovereignty, which is what I'm calling employers into, is it sounds like we've talked about this in prior webinars. It sounds like such a good idea with deregulation that suddenly employers are going to have all this freedom. We're not going to have the regulators on our backs all the time. But it goes back to what we talked about earlier with these social inflation judgments. So basically, what I'm asking you to do is call on your own ethics, your own values, and look at what's fair in your organization. Because if you don't, I can guarantee you that your employees and or candidates and their attorneys will be looking. So if you want to maintain your own organization, now is the time to look more closely at, am I doing the right thing? Because otherwise people will force you to do it.
And that ties right into, what is a leader in the 21st
Right.
century? And a leader that is transparent is a good thing.
Yeah, and I think there's a balance there as well, right? When we're talking about salaries, explaining to people how they fit into the organization, right? Like if I can't quantify what my salary is and what value it brings to my organization, then I probably need to go back and do some more evaluation because it's my job in my organization to know which roles fit and how they generate revenue. Otherwise, I'm probably going to fail as a business owner, right? So that's part of what we're talking about is don't just borrow somebody else's blueprint. Because if you do, you might end up with building something you don't really want that doesn't fit you. And there's a lot of opportunity. We have a lot of tools available to help you design something that works for you.
And this one,
That's pretty much what we're talking about.
it is, so, to be one of those 21st century leaders, review your DEI and D&I or inclusion policies for language. One of the accountabilities in the ISO 3415 is, do you have a standard description of the tasks of the job? And you'd be surprised how many, don't. It's like, well, it's sort of, well, we know what they do, but, you have to have a standard. You have to have things that are measurable.
Yeah,
And
you
people
need to
that,
know what your employees are doing. How else do you
yep,
know whether they're doing a good job?
yep.
Right? If you can't articulate it, how do you expect them to?
And
Right?
you need standardized decision criteria for the people that you hire, the wages, and the promotions and the bonuses. What are your standards? And they need to be written down. It needs to be measurable things, not I saw them doing a good job. Well, what was the good job that you saw them doing?
Right. Yeah,
Define
what does that specifically look like? I'm a specifist.
it. And this, I put this in there a little bit earlier, is I put our emails and our LinkedIn in the chat for anyone who has questions for us directly. These are upcoming sessions. And in June, one of the women in that two-person company that is doing the ISO 3415 has agreed to be our guest speaker,
Oh,
talking about,
wonderful.
yeah, AI automation and algorithmic fairness. So I think the fairness is the big place where she's going to come in, but she'll be yeah, they're really just lovely, lovely people and very knowledgeable and have been consulting for a long time. So, are there any other questions in the
I
chat?
was going to say, I'm going to come back to Sam because there was a little bit more in her um, question. So
Okay.
I hit the bottom part of it, but I want to go back to, says maybe this has been asked already, but what do you say to people who question the legitimacy of the data about women being paid less than men and women of color being paid less than white women?
Hmm.
And then also the stats from the women's policy research that was shared, were they comparing all women in general to men or comparing certain job categories with certain job categories? And is that how they found the lower pay?
And I will need to go, I need to open up the study again,
Mhm.
um, which, because I don't know that offhand,
And
but I will
I
put
can, if you don't mind, I'll jump in a little bit here because I do end up debating this a lot. And I can tell you that some of the studies, I'm not sure about this one in particular that Chris will follow up on, but you're hitting on some of the issues is that some of it is it's more general and women of course gravitate still to certain categories that maybe aren't as higher paid, right? Maybe more caregiving duties. Women do sometimes take off for maternity and things like that, and that may change their pay. So all of that, you're right, Sam, in asking that question because that's I'm sure something that you get asked if you talk about these. And what I always say to this is that all of that is valid and all of it needs to be considered. But now we're talking about that macro conversation. And when we're going back to organizations, which is also why I come back to that always, is that at the end of the day, the only thing you can control is what's going on in your organization. So although those conversations are important and they give us some indication of where to look, you're absolutely right that it's more complicated than that. Some of the reason women also gravitate to certain jobs that have been traditionally held by women is they're still encouraged, right? And so it's a whole bunch of criteria that come together and influences that come together. And so although I wouldn't hang my hat on any of it, I would hang my hat on what my data shows in my organization. And that's what I always do is use it as something that's informative, but not necessarily conclusive. The only thing that's conclusive in my organization is the data from my organization. So hopefully that helps you get some language around the challenges you might get or the questions and concerns about how valid is this data.
and there was a link shared, which I am going to go to it, open in browser. So I'm opening in another window. So thank you for that. Another standards organization, 21st century leadership. What I do, oh, and I had a really good comment and I just lost it.
Well, and I'll just throw in that because you're bringing up the racial equity also is that the same things that I commented about with women being, encouraged to go in certain directions, you will find that certain races, certain abilities, certain religions could be all kinds of different influences. So I think those same concerns and influences should be looked at no matter what. And again, they're informative and will guide us to where to look, but don't necessarily think they're conclusive on their own. You still need to do the data collection in your individual organization, and you need to look at yourself too. I can tell you, I've had these conversations, looking at how I gravitated to certain things at various times in my own life and how they both elevated me in some ways and got in my way in others.
And I remembered my point.
Great.
And it's that industries, and you kind of alluded to this, industries are not the same.
Right.
And one of the things that we provide in the Spectra assessment is comparison of the numbers to others within different industries. So, or your own industry. So you can, if you're in the services, if you're in healthcare, you can compare your scores to others within healthcare. So it's kind of same, a little bit same. Manufacturing, engineering, forest service. We haven't had any forest service assessments, but if we do, we'll have one to compare it to. Um, and service industries is typically one of the lower ones in terms of how inclusive they are in their organizations. So we are at time. And thank you so much. I know you've got a lot going on in your personal life, Nancy. So I
Yeah.
appreciate, hair tied back, and
You
ready
you
to
make it
go.
happen, right?
Make it happen. Make it happen. So we will see you in May for benefits equity and socioeconomic status that we kind of hinted at today.
Yep.
So we'll go for a deeper dive. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, stop sharing and end end the thing. There we go. Boop. End meeting.